are on the line. So that brings us to a very pertinent conversation, which is enhancing domestic resource mobilization in Uganda. How do we now move on? Let's say the United States actually gets away from halting foreign aid to stopping foreign aid. How do we catch up? How do we move on as a country? Because things don't look good at all, but then we have our people to look out for. We have Ugandans that are living positively with HIV/AIDS, and much of the funding we've been getting, especially in the health sector, comes from the United States, USAID. So looking at all that, one wonders, are we as a nation ready? What can we do better to ensure that we can support ourselves and support our people? So join me in this conversation. My name is Olive Monica Najuma, and I will be speaking to Alan Muhereza. Alan, good morning.
Good morning to you, Olive.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Now, Alan, please tell me more about your experience in the development world.
Good morning once again, and good morning to our viewers. As you've introduced me, I am Muhereza Alan, the team leader at Youth for Tax Justice Network. We are a young or youth-led organization that works to have young people in conversations around resource mobilization, allocation, and utilization for their benefits. So we look at, or we engage young people to be within that chain of how do states or governments raise resources, be it tax, debt, trade, natural resources, name it. How do they allocate it through the budget process? So which sector gets what and who decides and why? And then also how is it utilized at the end of the day? It's not enough to mobilize resources. It's not enough to allocate them. You also have to utilize them for the purpose for which you have mobilized them or you've allocated them for. So that's what we do. We just want to we center young people within those conversations. How do we see young people when states are raising resources? How do we locate ourselves, for example, in the budget process, in terms of how resources are being allocated? And also when it comes to utilization, when resources are allocated for certain sectors or certain things, do we then get to use those resources for what we get to use them for? So basically that's what we do. We are based here in Uganda, but we do work in other East and Southern African countries.
Okay. Now, having a look at the recent freeze by the United States President Donald Trump, I believe it could have far-reaching effects on Uganda and different countries in Africa, but our main focus here is Uganda, which raises an important question. How can we as Uganda survive and thrive using our own resources, right?
Yes. I think first maybe to give a comment about the freeze. I believe that after the review, because I think they froze it for about 90 days,
yes.
I think after the review, it should really come back to normal. I don't think...
Normal? Do you think
no, I'm saying in
terms
of that particular funding that is under review or that has been stopped for now. I think there's a big possibility that they may just say, okay, we've reviewed and we still believe this is important. Like you said, most of the support that, for example, the American government gives is within our health sector. And of course, health work is important work. You cannot come and say, we don't believe that supporting people to live positively with the HIV is not important. So I believe it's just a power move. He's going to, after 90 days, things may go back to the way they were for the people that are affected by this sort of freeze. And the other maybe thing is that most of that support goes directly to organizations and to implementing partners, not to states themselves. So it doesn't come to, most of it doesn't come to budget support, or it's not given directly to government. So, and I think that's what is causing a little bit of chaos because of the number of people that are affected. But to answer your question about then how do we get from where we are right now, I think this is a conversation we've been having for quite some time, to say that for a country to be able to own its own development agenda, it has to mobilize resources internally, but not only mobilize them internally, but in a sustainable way, in an equitable way, but also in now these days in a more gender just way, because it's not enough to just say we need more money. The how you get that money, why you get it is also important. So there are quite a number of things we can do. We've been doing. I must commend government to a certain degree has really been putting in an effort to see that we increase our resources. In 2019, government came up with the domestic resource mobilization strategy that basically talks about how government intends to increase resources, from which sectors, and how then we respond to that. So there have been some efforts. Of course, the question whether they are working, it is yet to be seen, because we know for a fact that every year URA raises more resources, whether it's tax revenue or non-tax revenue. But of course, we also know that every year the budget is bigger. So regardless of the fact that we see economic growth, we see budget increments, we also don't see the corresponding increase in tax revenue. For example, our tax to GDP ratio is still at around 14%. Tax to GDP is saying that we have very many people doing business or production or producing within the economy. And the expectation is that if you're producing, if you're earning some money within the economy, you should contribute your little or your fair share of tax. But what we see is that even with growth in our economy, we don't see the correspondence growth within our taxes. So meaning that there are people actually that are making more. If we are to believe the reports that, we grow for the past, I think, like 10 years, besides the COVID-19 period, Uganda has always been having a positive economic growth between 5% and 6.6%. So meaning that ideally we should also be seeing the tax grow with the economy. The tax revenue should, if we are saying the economy is growing, we should also be seeing a correspondence growth within the tax revenues, which is not happening because not everyone is paying their fair share of tax. And for us to be able to do that, I think we'll need to do two things. One, strengthening our tax system, basically. And this can take about three areas. First, you look at who is paying and who is not. So who is in the formal, of course, the challenge or I'll call it the challenge is that it's only a few people that are being taxed and taxed heavily compared to the broader sort of the economy. So if you have an economy that is 51% informal, meaning that most of those people are either producing for subsistence or they are actually producing, but they are not within the money economy, or if they are within the money economy, it is mostly cash, it's mostly cash facilitated. And cash, it's very hard to track cash. It's very hard to know what did you make, how did you make it. And so I think that's the first challenge. We broaden who is paying. And there have been some strides in this. The tax registers, I think, as of now, has about 4 million persons or entities in terms of who is paying. But of course,
but then when you look at a population of 70% young people, and then probably 50% of that being between the ages of 0 to 17,
True.
And then you also have the other group, like you said, that is depending on subsistence farming or not in the money economy. It leaves you and I and a few others paying taxes in every sense of the word. Do you see growth there?
No, and that's what we're saying, that is now part of the challenge. Because the question we're trying to answer is how does then government raise more resources for its to finance its development agenda? And we're saying we should get as many persons, and persons or entities for tax purposes can include both an individual and companies, for example. So when we're talking about the tax register, those 4 million are both companies and individuals. So, but I think there are things, and there have been efforts actually to come and bring some of those people within the taxing bracket when we are using things like presumptive taxation. But like I said, more has to be done to have as many people or as many entities contribute to reducing the tax burden. The other thing we could also look at is that we have, for example, very many professionals in this country that are exempt from taxes. And like you said, you rightly said that most of the population we have are young, are either dependents, but then we have a certain group of professionals that, for one reason or the other, I think they've been exempted.
Professionals and even investors.
Yeah, and I was going to also come to that in terms of the second point of streamlining tax incentives.
Yes.
I was reading that, okay, before I got for streamlining tax incentives, I was coming, yeah, for professionals, we have very many. For example, our MPs exempted themselves from paying taxes on their allowances.
Imagine that.
Yet their allowances take the biggest chunk of the money they earn. They said, okay, we only pay, but we pay on salaries. But you and I, if we earned allowances that accrue to us being employed, we would pay taxes on them. We pay taxes on them. So that's what I'm trying to say, that there are certain people within our country that have been exempt from paying, and yet they should also be able to
and yet
contribute.
This money also comes from the government coffers.
Exactly.
So the government is not getting back its worth.
Yes, no, but the tax justice is basically everyone should pay their fair share of tax.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to. And the idea is that if everyone pays a little, no one has to pay a lot. The reason that's why everyone else is paying a lot is because there are few people paying, or there are few entities paying. But if you have as many entities pay, then the expectation is that the burden reduces on everyone else that has been paying. So that is the first. The second that I was coming to is the streamlining of tax exemptions. Now, tax exemption, of course, government has been using them to as a policy to attract investment and see certain growth in certain sectors, which is, I think, if looked at broadly, would be commendable or would be okay. But the challenge is that there are those that we consider harmful, for example, tax incentives that are not, that first, even when given out, because by the time you're giving them out, you've done a cost-benefit analysis to say, we are going to forego this tax revenue because we are going to have an investment in this sector. We are going to have more jobs. If it is electricity, these people are going to produce electricity. People will have cheap electricity. They can then produce and all that. So the question then is, after 10 years, after 15 years, when you do an analysis of whether those incentives have worked or not, then do we still have to give them out? And I think there was a very big debate around the tax exemption of, I think it was Bujagali and all that. And that was the question, that if we're giving or foregoing revenue for stated purposes and stated reasons, then we should be able to, at the end of the 20 years, at the end of the 10 years, see, are these incentives working? And if they are not, then we remove them. And I'm glad that some have been removed from our laws. If you look at, I think initially they would give you, for people that would be industries, for example, they will say, we are going to give you wear and tear, 50% in the first year of your capital, for example. And that meant that some of those people would perpetually be loss-making positions because they have to recoup some of that money very fast. And then that would leave them in a state that they don't make any money, so you can't tax them. And yet that would be an artificial loss, just because you allowed them to deduct wear and tear very quickly, which was removed. So the point we are trying to make, we are making, is that for those tax exemptions that are harmful, we should do away with them. And if you look at, for example, the government also gives away, money or spends money through tax expenditures, which include holidays, waivers, and all that. And for the year 2022 to 2023, that was about 2.9 trillion. Now, if you looked at the money we hope to lose, for example, in terms of the health funding that the US, is almost the same amount.
Last year, the US funded around $450 million.
Yeah, I would think it would be more than that, but I'm saying if it is that, we would still have the money to. Of course, government would then argue that, we don't look at only the monetary term that comes with the loss, that you don't just look at the 2.9 trillion, you look at the other, have the sectors grown and all that. But we are saying the money is there anyway. It is, if you want it, you can get it. Then I think thirdly, we need to also improve on our social contract with government, and of course there have also been efforts towards that, to see value for money, to see that if we can be able to locate where our taxpayer money is going, then chances are that there will be some bit of compliance, or it will induce some bit of compliance when it comes to taxpayers. Ordinarily, no one wants to pay tax. If given an opportunity, everyone would not pay tax.
Yeah.
But the reason as to why people pay, or they don't mind, or they give unwillingly, but they would say, okay, you take 40% of my salary, but if I need a certain service here and there, I will be able to.
I should get it with ease.
Exactly. And then that really brings about that sort of contract that I will have then with the government, that, okay, I'll continue complying, but then I expect to see certain services, certain goods from the government that you'd expect. And I'll give an example. I came using the Nigeria road, and
you don't need to tell me.
yeah. So the question then for someone who is there would be like, why am I paying tax if that is happening? So that is also one of, and there have been initiatives like the Taxpayers Week, where URA and government ministries come to tell us when we, but the idea is that you should not come to tell me. I should be able to see and feel some of these benefits, even without you coming to tell me. Then, of course, another way of value for money, we can also look at projects. We waste a lot of money in terms of when we don't implement projects on time. You commission, let me say, road, but you've not mobilized resources, you've not compensated people that are going where the road is going to pass, you've not, but you go ahead and borrow money for that road. The road that was supposed to take two years takes 6-7 years, and all that means money. Money that could be saved and put back within the system.
And sometimes it's, for instance, let's have a look at the Mpigi Road. It's already gone past the time it was supposed to be completed. It hasn't yet been completed. The money has tripled, and it's still not yet finished. Done. And we don't know when that will be. The other example would be the Northern Bypass. It took well longer than it had to be, and then at some point it had to be enlarged. And all this is money.
Yes. And you've just given just a few examples, but you can think about almost most of the government projects where a government is putting money, or where a government is mobilizing money with other stakeholders that don't start on time, or that start on time for one reason or the other, don't go the way they go. There we lose quite a lot of resources. So there's actually a lot that we can do. There's actually a lot of resources, a lot of money within this economy. And this is the expectation that when President Trump was campaigning, he said he would do that. So it didn't fall out of the blue that, one day he comes and says we're moving, or we are halting aid.
We saw this coming.
We saw this coming.
But also, as African countries, Uganda in particular, it's been over 50 years or more of us depending on foreign aid. And we have seen, like the few examples we've given, but also we have seen funds given to us squandered in broad daylight. And the development partners have been watching and saying, you know what, if this is what you're doing, the good example is many countries have been supporting the AIDS response in the country. But I remember around 2023, we started having many of them pulling out, saying they had a target. I mean, 2030 is around the corner, and we were supposed by then to have 0 new HIV infections, but we still have them. In as much as they've gone down, we still have them, and in some parts of the country, we are seeing an increased number of infections. That being said, should we as Ugandan, or even as the country, I think we should even be embarrassed to cry foul about the fact that there is a hold, and probably at some point, it may not happen this year, but Alan, I feel like at some point, this aid is going to reduce exponentially.
True. And again, like I said, I think on the part of government, there's been some effort. Like I said, in 2019, they came up with a strategy to see how do we enhance resource mobilization. Now, whether that strategy is working or not, of course, it should be up for review and all that. But, and it is not the first time. I'll give an example. When we passed a law here in Uganda against homosexuality, almost the same thing happened. Some of our development partners said, we are not approving new projects, we are going to fast until this law either goes away or something like that. So it is something that we've been they've been poking us at one time or the other. So it is something I think that as a country, I would want to believe as government knows that this is a challenge. And the evidence is there that the resources are there. In 2015, the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, led a high panel to evaluate how much money, for example, as a continent we lose to what we call illicit financial flows, monies that go out of the countries, whether through illegal activities, whether through tax evasion, avoidance, corruption, and all that. And the conclusion was really, one of the conclusions was really insightful. They were saying that for every dollar we get, whether it's foreign aid, whether it's investment, whether it is whatever thing you could think about, for every dollar we get that comes into the continent, we lose 3. So meaning that whether it is debt, whether it is, we have the ability, if we plugged some of our leakages, to actually raise the resources internally. Of course, there will be certain leakages one or the other, but the challenge then would be that how do we try as much as possible to close these leakages? In the event, and that's why for us when we're looking at resource mobilization, you look at the entire chain that you mobilize, you allocate, you utilize. And I'll give an example. Most of the efforts, for example, have been around plugging those gaps, prevention. Let me say, if it's tax avoidance or if it's tax evasion, you're trying to stop the evasion, you're trying to stop the avoidance. If it is within misinvoicing, you're trying to stop that. If it's within the corruption, but not a lot of effort has been around, for example, asset recovery. When we get to know that you actually evaded tax, what happens next? When we actually get to know that resources were misappropriated, and we know, and of course, they will say this is a legal process, you have to prosecute, you have to convict, but for some people, you actually know, you even see, they cannot. So also the point of then at what point do we say, okay, we need to recover? Because some of these things we know. I'll give an example. I would want to assume that most of the resources that we lose are not kept here, for example. Those that get to go to other countries, and you make a case that, you know what, these are resources that ordinarily will belong to Ugandans, from individual A or B. How do we get this? Do we, for example, have a mechanism of getting that money back? If we've successfully identified resources that were taken from us, we say these are our resources, we agree. Is there a framework, for example, even with other governments to say this is the money that, okay, it is going to come back to us? Because prevention is okay, but what happens when you fail to prevent, but you can actually make a case to say that these are our resources and we know that they are for Uganda? What are the efforts to say, okay, then we look at some of that asset recovery? Because at the end of the day, we may not be successful in preventing, but if we can also say, okay, we've not been able to prevent, but now we know that you evaded tax, for example, or now we know that you avoided, how do we then try and get back what we would already, or what we would have tried to get back? So I think those are conversations that have been happening. Of course, the question, and it goes back to the social contract, whether we are seeing the corresponding urgency from our political leadership to come and say, okay, we want to solve this problem. From the technocrats, I think they have everything figured out. If you ask RA, where do you think, they will give you very quick answers. If you went to the tax policy department within Ministry of Finance, they have those answers. I think then it comes back to us now trying to create that sort of contract and social contract with our politicians to say, we now need political will to solve some of these issues, because as we've said, the money is there.
Okay, now speaking about politicians, you have highlighted that members of parliament do not pay tax on their allowances. But those put aside, what other sectors in Uganda do you think have untapped revenue and maybe potential that we could look into to reduce some of the dependence on foreign aid?
I think the biggest sector would be the natural resource sector, or the what would ideally go under natural resources, minerals, anything to do with the natural resource, I think is a very big untapped sector. And I'll give you an example. Right now, a kilogram of gold is about, give or take, about 70,000 US dollars, a kilogram.
How much?
70,000 US dollars. But do you know how much Uganda charges on that? It charges only $200 out of $70,000.
Why?
Now that's the question. That's the question we should ask Parliament. That's the question we should ask Minister of Finance. So the potential
makes no sense.
Exactly, exactly. So if you looked at it then that way, it means that we could actually raise quite, and as of now, and we know that, for example, now gold is one of our biggest exports as a country. And if we are only charging $200 out of the 70,000, then the question is why are we doing it? And you could even look at other sectors, whether it's oil, whether it's mining, phosphates and all that. The idea is that, and most of the actually tax abuses usually happen within that sector. People under-declare, for example, if you're mining iron ore or what, you under-declare that, you know, either in terms of the price or in terms of the actual quantities that you're taking out and all that. So I think, one, that is one of sectors that we really can leverage on to raise more resources. And like I said, you look across the board. I'll give an example. Before, and there have been, for example, there's been litigation around capital gains tax on tallow and when it was farming out and all that. But that is even before oil comes out of the ground anyway. That's what we are thinking. So if you have colossal sums of money that are already exchanging hands before you can even actually trade in the oil itself, then there are resources within that sector. And that's why I was saying, then we come back to the incentives we've been giving and say, if we had given these incentives for investment in this sector, have we achieved that? Have those that come in done what they said they would come in to do? If they've not, then we remove them. And the good thing, I remember, I think it was in 2014, there was East Africa Council of Ministers directive around incentives harmonization within East Africa. And one of the points was that if you're given an investment incentive, for example, in Kenya for 10 years, Uganda should not be able to give you that sort of same incentive, because the idea would be that you've already utilized, because we're a community, you've already utilized that incentive. The people of Uganda should be able to benefit from the investment that has happened in Kenya, and vice versa. So that is one of the areas we could keep looking at. Then the second sector, I think, is the ICT sector. We have a lot of innovations that are going around or that are going on within the ICT sector, and this has come with the digitalization sort of revolution, that everything now is being digital and all that, and meaning that also monies are moving and becoming digital, and everything is now coming to, you know, and for some countries, they've introduced what we call, I think even Uganda, what we call digital service taxes. And the idea here, of course, the implementation would still be something that needs to be improved on or enhanced, but it is also something that that has the potential to get us resources that we want. And I'll give an example. If I'm paying Netflix my $13, the Ugandan government should be able to tap in on some of that amount, because the value has been made here, the money has been created here. Why should it be that a US company then gets to take all the yet the internet infrastructure that we are using is Ugandan internet? Yes,
haven't I already paid for that when I subscribe for data though?
No. You see, but data is a different thing. Data is facilitating you to access a service.
And there is a tax to that.
Yes, but even Netflix, because Netflix is not selling you data. Netflix is selling you content, is selling you...
And it's making money.
And it's making money in Uganda.
Yes.
And the idea, because if I made money in Uganda, I would pay money in Uganda. I will pay tax. I pay tax.
That's right.
Yes,
That's
because
right.
I've sourced my money here. Even the money I've sourced elsewhere, ideally, URA should be able to tax it. So the point I'm trying to make is that, and it's not just, I gave Netflix as an example,
Yes.
but think about any software that you use and you pay for. The value is being derived here, but are we seeing that sort of benefit also coming back in terms of...
countries where this is happening, using the same example? For instance, is the UK government benefiting from Netflix?
Ideally, it should. And I think that is the conversation. Of course, there are now quite a number of, there have been quite a number of international efforts to tax the digital economy, especially within the OECD framework. They have an inclusive framework around how do we, and they're trying to come up with a certain calculation, how much a company should be able to pay to countries and all that. But that may not happen because, again, taxing it, and that's why I was saying maybe the administration needs to, we need to improve on how then would we, because it's easy to compel some of these companies to, and I think for some of them, I think it's, is it Google? Included VAT, for example. So it is easy to compel, and governments have the power to say, if you're to give us, if people in this country are to enjoy these services, you should register for these taxes and you should pay on them. And payment is very easy because for every other person that, because some of those transactions are automatic, let me say, when you pay, they deduct the money. Ideally, government should be able to receive the way IFRS tracks our expenditures, and it should be the same way. And why? Because right now, almost every software that you use, you pay for.
That's
and
right.
Yes. So
someone is gaining, but the government isn't.
Yeah, and these are multinational corporations that have their annual profits are bigger than our economy, bigger than our GDP. And
that's right.
They are making that money from this country. So the idea is that we should find innovative ways to tax multinational corporations, especially those that are within the technology sector.
Okay, well, we are looking at how we can enhance Uganda's resource mobilization so that we lessen our overdependence on foreign aid. And this is on the heels of the executive order to freeze financial aid to different countries by the US President Donald Trump. Now, I have some comments, and I don't know if this is your actual name, but it says Rango Magufuli, and he says tax on gold is tax on gold at $200 US. It is because the people in government are the ones exporting the gold. So it makes sense. That is his allegation. Then Omgaga Saurembo Enaweru MP Adako Nasana Municipality says omusolo nga gususse abantu buli woita bakaaba naddala abasuubuzi embeera ebanyiga. Basically, he says the taxes are too much and traders are suffering because of these taxes, and you're here advocating for taxes.
Okay, I think to just respond to that,
yes.
Like I said, you can look at it in two ways. The idea is that if everyone pays a little, no one has to pay a lot.
Okay.
The reason as why the burden is so high, especially within those that are already within the system, the formal system, is because very few are paying. And that's why you find it so high. But also, even on the, and me for the traders, I would just say they should embrace some of the technologies that, because it will help you, for taxes that they can't pass on to the final consumer, it will help us also know who, because we also know that there are also people who don't, who among the traders themselves, who benefit or who evade. I'll give an example. There are people that have intentionally remained informal. Let me put it that way. Not that they can't register, not that they can't, they don't have the resources to even get professional help like accountants and what. No. And they deliberately do it so that their things remain vague, so that for the purpose, or the only purpose for them not to be able to pay tax. So, but tax justice is basically let everyone pay their fair share of tax.
Okay.
However little it is,
Yes.
yes, then
Thank
the
you.
burden reduces.
Okay, the last comment is from Chigwe Nsubuga Livingston of Rezandeja Division. He says, thank you, Sister Olive Monica, for the show. There is a challenge in domestic resource mobilization. Reason being, we have politicians who always set themselves big salaries, allowances, foreign trips, and holding conferences and workshops in big hotels, among others. It would sound human to reduce the above-mentioned activities for third world countries like Uganda. And Biliko says a lot of undeclared taxes are the mobile money and financial services companies paying all our our taxes. I also suggest taxing land and cattle appropriately. Unfortunately, time has run out, so I would like to hear your last thoughts in a few seconds. You could comment on one of these.
Yes, I think he's right that I don't know if we have the capacity to, for example, audit our telecom companies to know how much they actually make and how much they are paying on what we pay and all that. But I think overall, in terms of, and as a country, we should expect that monies from outside will continue to dwindle. We should also expect that we shouldn't look at mobilization in terms of reliance, over-reliance, for example, on debt, because it brings us back to the same problem. And the only thing I think I can ask Ugandans is that we be each brother's keeper. We hold each other's feet to the fire, especially for our political class. Like I said, they are the people that make these reforms. If you look at, for example, the proposals that are made from finance, the proposals that are made to URA, by the time they reach the finance committee of parliament, most of them either get watered down or some of them outrightly rejected, not because they're not good proposals, but because of vested interests, especially within the political class. So I think as citizens, we should just work towards having a stronger social contract to hold every person accountable, especially if they're in charge of tax policy at a political level. And the good news is that we are about to start a very long process of politicking because of next year's elections. And this is, I think, the time we should get some of these answers, really. This is the time we should ask, for example, why do we pay $200 on 70,000 worth of gold? Yes, so some of these answers we should now be, I had the aspiring politicians and what we need to get these answers. And it doesn't stop at during electoral cycles, but every year we have a budget process. Starts around September, August, thereabout, until May. And I'm saying every year within that budget process, young people especially, let me talk now young people, should participate in that process. Because during the budget, we have the budget on one side, we have the tax bills on the other. As they are coming up with the budget, they will come up with the tax proposals or tax bills that they hope that will enable government to raise resources to pay for the budget. So we have an opportunity every year to question some of these policies that we have and to see to it that we increase the resources that we are raising within our borders.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. We've been looking at enhancing domestic resource mobilization in Uganda. This is on the heels of some of the aid that we have been receiving being frozen by the U.S. President Donald Trump by an executive order that he signed. We hope and pray that after 90 days it would have been reviewed and reinstated. But the conversation can't go any further. I've been speaking to Alan Muhereza, who is the team leader at Youth for Tax Justice Network. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Olivia.
Oh, stick with us. Good Morning Uganda continues.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda.
Welcome to Good Morning Uganda, your go-to morning show to kickstart your day with all the latest updates.
Let's dive deep into issues that matter most to you.
In a world of stories waiting to be told, the headlines are your guide. Navigate the currents of news and knowledge with our daily updates of newspapers. Stay informed, stay empowered.
From the roar of the crowd to the thunder of victory, witness the drama unfold with our sports updates. Whether on the field or in the stands, join us as we celebrate the spirit of champions.
Rise with Good Morning Uganda, weekdays from 6:30 a.m.
Juko.
Yo.
Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sevatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that.
Okay.
The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Good morning, and it's now time for business. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko. We start off with the Energy Summit, the Africa Energy Summit that is happening in Tanzania. Now, the Prime Minister, Robin Nabanja, held a delegation to attend the Africa Energy Summit at the Julius Nyerere International Convention Center in eastern Tanzania. While representing President Yoweri Museveni, Nabanja said that the African leaders should prioritize energy and should not be left to the private sector because it's the backbone of the economy. Now, using the Runyankore word Omushokoro, Museveni says that the energy sector is the bone marrow of the economy, and the president says that Uganda has been on a journey of lowering the cost of electricity to $5 cents, and that is per kilowatt, in order to facilitate industrialization and to also enhance industrial growth within Uganda. Now, the president also further said that for socio-economic transformation, development partners across the continent must prioritize providing concessional financing or grants in the critical sectors to lower the cost of production. And in the same speech that was delivered by the Prime Minister, Robin Nabanja, the president assured the African leaders of Uganda's commitment in its National Development Plan 4 that is going to be enrolled in order to ensure access to electricity to accelerate development. Now, on the other hand, the president of Tanzania, Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, revealed that the African Heads of State Energy Summit is about supporting households to transform through access to electricity, which should be affordable. Now, on the other end, Akinwumi Adesina and Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank and the other of the African Development Bank in Adesina, also reassured or committed with an initiative supported by $40 billion, that is from the African Development Bank, and then the World Bank as well, with a tune of about $48 US. Now, on the other side, the Dar es Salaam Declaration also is outlining strategies to lower electricity costs, but again, in the same regard, reduce dependency on firewood and also boost clean energy production, offering hope for a brighter and more sustainable future for millions across the African continent. Now, on the summit attended by 25 African presidents and also 1,000 delegates focused on Mission 300, highlighting the urgent need to address Africa's energy deficit. Now, currently, 71 million people lack access to electricity, posing significant barriers to economic growth. Now, away from that, in the wake of the president's speech concerning levels of aflatoxins that are found in grains like peanuts and maize, the Uganda Muslim Teachers Association took the initiative to inspect the quality of maize flour supplied to their schools to ensure the maize is suitable for their learners' consumption. Now, the teachers did this on a tour of Mandela Millers in Busega, and also when you look at research which has so far shown that aflatoxin levels in maize are about 20 parts per billion, that is ppb, or higher, are considered dangerous for human consumption, meaning schools do resume normal business starting Monday, 3rd February. Many of those under school administrations are making sure that food consumption, or the food that the students and the pupils are to consume, is readily available for the children and safer for consumption. Now, it's for that same reason that during the process of storing the maize grain and production of the maize flour at the Mandela Millers, there are also specific standards and procedures that are followed to ensure that the food is meeting the standards for consumption. Now, furthermore, the millers use a state-of-the-art non-human system for flour production, and this particular one also produces human contact with the maize, which also further ensures that the maize flour is free from contamination. Now, the Uganda Muslim Teachers Association, who were at the millers to inspect the quality of the maize flour, appreciated the work done thus far, as they also called for the action from other teachers within the education system in the country to ensure that food consumed by students and pupils as first term resumes is of good standards and also not dangerous to their well-being. And now, away from that, we head to the United States, because away from that, the US President Donald Trump is seeking a legal settlement that will see Facebook and Instagram owner Meta pay him roughly $25 million. Now, that is approximately 20 million pounds. Now, Trump sued the social media giant and its chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg, in 2021 over the suspension of his social media accounts after the 6th January Capitol riots that year. Now, in July 2024, Meta lifted the final restrictions on Trump's Facebook and Instagram accounts in the lead up to the US presidential elections. Now, the settlement was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, and around $22 million of the settlement will go to a fund for Trump's presidential library. Now, the balance will then be used to cover legal costs and other plaintiffs who signed on the lawsuit, as Meta will not admit wrongdoing. Now, the company suspended also Trump's accounts in 2021 and said it would only ban him from the platform for at least 2 years. Now, after Trump's election victory in November, Mr. Zuckerberg visited his Florida resort in Mar-a-Lago. The move was seen as evidence of an apparent thawing in their once frosty relations. Now, following a month later, Meta donated $1 million to an inauguration fund for Trump, and then Zuckerberg was a guest at Trump's inauguration at the US Capitol earlier this month, seated with the leading tech giants or tech billionaires in the world. Now, for years, Trump has been highly critical of Mr. Zuckerberg and Facebook, calling his social media platforms anti-Trump in 2017. And lastly, from business, we now turn our focus on artificial intelligence and more conversations from tech, because now what is coming in from China is revealing that after causing shockwaves with the AI model, with capabilities rivaling the creations of Google and OpenAI, now China's DeepSeek is facing questions about whether its bold claims stand up to scrutiny. Now, the Hangzhou-based startup's announcement that it developed R1 at a fraction of the cost of Silicon Valley's latest models immediately called into question assumptions about the United States' dominance in AI and the sky-high market valuation of its top tech firms. Now, some skeptics, however, have challenged DeepSeek's account of working on a shoestring budget, suggesting that the firm likely had access to more advanced chips and more funding than it has acknowledged. It is a very much an open question whether DeepSeek's claims can be taken at face value. Now, the AI community will be digging into them, and we'll find out, as Pedro Domingos, Professor Emeritus of the Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, revealed. Now, also, it is plausible that they can train a model with $6 million, according to Domingos. Now, away from that, in a research paper released last week, the DeepSeek development said they had used 2,000 NVIDIA H800 GPUs, a less advanced chip originally designed to comply with U.S. export controls, and spent $5.6 million to train R1's foundation model. Now, there's also a V3, and the OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has stated that it cost more than $100 million to train its chatbot, GPT-4. Now, while analysts have estimated that the model used as many as 25,000 more, but it is not what the CEO believes. And as we're ending up with business this week, we look at the forex market to see how the forex market has been faring and how the Ugandan shilling has been faring against the other currencies. Because of business Wednesday, the US dollar opened buying at 3,685.36, while selling with 3,865.30. By midday, the US dollar was buying at 3,685.14, while selling was then at 3,695.14. Closing time, so the US dollar buy at 3,684.91, while selling at 3,694.91. The Great Britain pound was buying at 4,588.81, while selling at 4,601.27. The euro was buying at 3,845.94, while selling at 3,856.37. And then the Kenyan shilling was buying at 28.52, while selling at 28.59. Now, the Tanzanian shilling increased a little with 1.46 from the initial 1.45 where it was on Tuesday, and selling then closed at 1.46, up from the 1.45 it was on Tuesday close of business. Now, the South African rand dropped a bit, because buying was 197.62 and closing the selling was at 198.16 Ugandan shillings. Well, for more business updates and news on Saturday, 8:30 p.m. in UBC, the Business Roundup gives you the top highlighters from the world of business within the country, across the region, and the entire continent. For now, business ends here. I'll be back Monday with the latest from the world of business. Good morning, Uganda does continue, though, with the agenda conversation. Stick around.
UBC.
He expected me to die like within the first 2 years. Out of the blue,